You deceive yourself, my poor Andre. The piece last night would have been nothing without the players. You are fortunate in your Scaramouche. In confidence, I present you to him. You Scaramouche? You! She turned to regard him fully. He smiled his closed-lipped smile that made wrinkles like gashes in his cheeks. He nodded, and I didn't recognize you. I thank you for the tribute. You imagine, of course, that I was a scene shifter. And now that you know all about me, what of Gavrilac? What of my godfather? He was well, she told him, and still profoundly indignant with André-Louis for his defection, while secretly concerned on his behalf. I shall write to him today that I have seen you. Do so. Tell him that I am well and prospering. But say no more. Do not tell him what I am doing. He has his prejudices too. Besides, it might not be prudent. And now the question I have been burning to ask ever since I entered your carriage. Why are you in Nantes, Aline? I am on a visit to my Aunt Madame de Sautrin. It was with her that I came to the play yesterday. We have been dull at the chateau, but it will be different now. Madame my aunt is receiving several guests today. De la Tour d'Azur is to be one of them. André-Louis frowned and sighed. Did you ever hear, Aline, how poor Philippe de Vilmorin came by his end? Yes, I was told, first by my uncle, then by de la Tour d'Azur himself. Did not that help you to decide this marriage question? How could it? You forget that I am but a woman. You don't expect me to judge between men in matters such as these? Why not? You are well able to do so, the more since you have heard two sides. For my godfather would tell you the truth. If you cannot judge, it is that you do not wish to judge. His tone became harsh. Willfully, you close your eyes to justice that might check the course of your unhealthy, unnatural ambition. Excellent, she exclaimed, and considered him with amusement and something else. Do you know that you are almost droll? You rise unblushing from the dregs of life in which I find you, and shake off the arm of that theater girl, to come and preach to me. If these were the dregs of life, I might still speak from them to counsel you out of my respect and devotion. Aline. He was very stiff and stern. But they are not the dregs of life. Honor and virtue are possible to a theater girl. They are impossible to a lady who sells herself to gratify ambition, who for position, riches, and a great title barters herself in marriage. She looked at him breathlessly. Anger turned her pale. She reached for the cord. I think I had better let you alight, so that you may go back to practice virtue and honor with your theater wench. You shall not speak so of her, Aline. Faith! Now we are to have heat on her behalf. You think I am too delicate? You think I should speak of her as a... If you must speak of her at all, he interrupted hotly, you'll speak of her as my wife. Amazement smothered her anger. Her pallor deepened. My God, she said, and looked at him in horror. And in horror she asked him presently, You are married to that? Not yet, but I shall be soon. And let me tell you that this girl whom you visit with your ignorant contempt is as good and pure as you are, Aline. She has wit and talent which have placed her where she is and shall carry her a deal farther. And she has the womanliness to be guided by natural instincts in the selection of her mate. She was trembling with passion. She tugged the cord. You will descend this instant, she told him fiercely. That you should dare to make a comparison between me and that... And my wife-to-be... he interrupted, before she could speak the infamous word. He opened the door for himself without waiting for the footman and leapt down. My compliments, said he, furiously, to the assassin you are to marry. He slammed the door. Drive on, he bade the coachman. The carriage rolled away up the Faubourg Aigan, leaving him standing where he had alighted, quivering with rage. Gradually, as he walked back to the inn, his anger cooled. Gradually, as he cooled, he perceived her point of view, and in the end forgave her. It was not her fault that she thought as she thought. Her rearing had been such as to make her look upon every actress as a trull, just as it had qualified her calmly to consider the monstrous marriage of convenience into which she was invited. He got back to the inn to find the company at table. Silence fell when he entered, so suddenly that of necessity it must be supposed he was himself the subject of the conversation. Harlequin and Columbine had spread the tale of this prince in disguise, caught up into the chariot of a princess, and carried off by her. And it was a tale that had lost nothing in the telling. Clymene had been silent and thoughtful, pondering what Columbine had called this romance of hers. Clearly, her Scaramouche must be vastly other than he had hitherto appeared, or else that great lady, and he would never have used such familiarity with each other. Imagining him no better than he was, Clymene had made him her own, and now she was to receive the reward of disinterested affection. Even old Benet's secret hostility towards André-Louis melted before this astounding revelation. He had pinched his daughter's ear quite playfully. Ah, trust you to have penetrated his disguise, my child. She shrank resentfully from that implication. But I did not. I took him for what he seemed. Her father winked at her very solemnly and laughed. To be sure, you did. But like your father, who was once a gentleman and knows the ways of gentlemen, you detected in him a subtle something different from those with whom misfortune has compelled you hitherto to herd. You knew as well as I did that he never caught that trick of haughtiness, that grand air command in a lawyer's musty office, and that his speech had hardly the ring or his thoughts the complexion of the bourgeois that he pretended to be, and it was shrewd of you to have made him yours. Do you know that I shall be very proud of you yet, Clymene? She moved away without answering. Her father's oiliness offended her. Scaramouche was clearly a great gentleman, an eccentric if you please, but a man born, and she was to be his lady. Her father must learn to treat her differently. She looked shyly, with a new shyness, at her lover when he came into the room where they were dining. She observed for the first time that proud carriage of the head, with the chin thrust forward. That was a trick of his, and she noticed what a grace he moved, the grace of one who in youth has had his dancing masters and fencing masters. It almost hurt her when he flung himself into a chair and exchanged a quip with Harlequin in the usual manner as when equal, and it offended her still more that Harlequin, knowing what he now knew, should use him with the same unbecoming familiarity. Chapter 9. The Awakening. Do you know, said Clymene, that I am waiting for the explanation which I think you owe me? They were alone together, lingering still at the table to which André-Louis had come belatedly, and André-Louis was loading himself a pipe. Of late, since joining the Benet troupe, he had acquired the habit of smoking. The others had gone. Some would take the air, and others, like Benet and Madame, because they felt that it were discreet to leave those two to the explanations that must pass. It was a feeling that André-Louis did not share. He kindled a light and leisurely applied it to his pipe. A frown came to settle on his brow. Explanation? He questioned presently, and looked at her. But on what score? On the score of the deception you have practiced on us, on me. I have practiced none, he assured her. You mean that you have simply kept your own counsel, and that in silence there is no deception. But it is deceitful to withhold facts concerning yourself and your true station from your future wife. You should not have pretended to be a simple country lawyer, which, of course, anyone could see that you are not. It may have been very romantic. But, infant, will you explain? I see, he said, and pulled at his pipe. But you are wrong, Clymene. I have practiced no deception. If there are things about me that I have not told you, it is that I did not account them of much importance. But I have never deceived you by pretending to be other than I am. I am neither more nor less than I have represented myself. This persistence began to annoy her, and the annoyance showed on her winsome face, colored her voice. Ha! And that fine lady of nobility with whom you are so intimate, who carried you off in her cabriolet with so little ceremony towards myself. What is she to you? A sort of sister, said he. A sort of sister. She was indignant. Harlequin foretold that you would say so, but he was amusing himself. It was not very funny. It is less funny still from you. She has a name, I suppose, a sort of sister? Certainly she has a name. She is Eline de Circadia, the niece of Quentin de Circadia, Lord of Gavrillac. Oh, that's a sufficiently fine name for your sort of sister. What sort of sister, my friend? For the first time in their relationship, he observed and deplored the taint of vulgarity, of shrewishness, in her manner. It would have been more accurate in me to have said a sort of reputed left-handed cousin. A reputed left-handed cousin. And what sort of relationship may that be? Faith, you dazzle me with your lucidity. It requires to be explained. That is what I have been telling you. But you seem very reluctant with your explanations. Oh, no. It is only that they are so unimportant. But be you the judge. Her uncle, M. de Circadia, is my godfather, and she and I have been playmates from infancy as a consequence. It is popularly believed in Gavrilac that M. de Circadia is my father. He has certainly cared for my rearing from my tenderest years, and it is entirely owing to him that I was educated at Louis le Grand. I owe to him everything that I have, or rather, everything that I had. For my own free will I cut myself adrift, and today I possess nothing save what I can earn for myself in the theater or elsewhere. She sat stunned and pale under that cruel blow to her swelling pride. Had he told her this but yesterday, it would have made no impression upon her. It would have mattered not at all. The event of the day, coming as a sequel, would but have enhanced him in her eyes. But coming now, after her imagination had woven for him so magnificent a background, after the rashly assumed discovery of his splendid identity had made her the envied of all the company, after having been in her own eyes and theirs enshrined by marriage with him as a great lady, this disclosure crushed and humiliated her. Her prince in disguise was merely the outcast bastard of a country gentleman. She would be the laughingstock of every member of her father's troop, of all those who had so lately envied her this romantic good fortune. "You should have told me this before," she said, in a dull voice that she strove to render steady. "Perhaps I should, but does it really matter?" "Matter?" She suppressed her fury to ask another question. "You say that this M. de Circadia is popularly believed to be your father. What precisely do you mean?" "Just that. It is a belief that I do not share. It is a matter of instinct, perhaps, with me. Moreover, once I asked de Circadia point blank, and I received from him a denial. It is not, perhaps, a denial to which one would attach too much importance in all the circumstances. Yet I have never known M. de Circadia for other than a man of strictest honor, and I should hesitate to disbelieve him, particularly when his statement leaps with my own instincts. He assured me that he did not know who my father was. And your mother, was she equally ignorant?" She was sneering, but he did not remark it. Her back was to the light. He would not disclose her name to me. He confessed her to be a dear friend of his. She startled him by laughing, and her laugh was not pleasant. "A very dear friend, you may be sure, you simpleton. What name do you bear?" He restrained his own rising indignation to answer her question calmly. "Moreau, it was given me, so I am told, from the Brittany village in which I was born, but I have no claim to it. In fact, I have no name, unless it be Scaramouche, to which I have earned a title. So that you see, my dear," he ended with a smile, "I have practiced no deception whatever." No, I see that now." She laughed without mirth, then drew a deep breath and rose. "I am very tired," she said. He was on his feet in an instant, all solicitude, but she waved him wearily back. "I think I will rest until it is time to go to the theater." She moved toward the door, dragging her feet a little. He sprang to open it, and she passed out without looking at him. Her so brief romantic dream was ended. The glorious world of fancy which in the last hour she had built with such elaborate detail, over which it should be her exalted destiny to rule, lay shattered about her feet, its debris so many stumbling blocks that prevented her from winning back to her erstwhile content in Scaramouche as he really was. André-Louis sat in the window embrasure, smoking and looking idly out across the river. He was intrigued and meditative. He had shocked her. The fact was clear, not so the reason. That he should confess himself nameless should not particularly injure him in the eyes of a girl reared amid the surroundings that had been Clymene's. And yet that his confession had so injured him was fully apparent. There, still at his brooding, the returning Columbine discovered him a half-hour later. "All alone, my prince," was her laughing greeting, which suddenly threw light upon his mental darkness. Clymene had been disappointed of hopes that the wild imagination of these players had suddenly erected upon the incident of his meeting with Aline. Poor child, he smiled whimsically at Columbine. "I am likely to be so for some little time," said he, "until it becomes a commonplace that I am not, after all, a prince." "Not a prince? Oh, but a duke, then at least a marquis. Not even a chevalier, unless it be of the order of fortune. I am just Scaramouche. My castles are all in Spain." Disappointment clouded the lively, good-natured face. "And I had imagined you—" "I know," he interrupted, That is the mischief. He might have gauged the extent of that mischief by Clymene's conduct that evening toward the gentlemen of fashion who clustered now in the green room between the acts to pay their homage to the incomparable amoureux. Hitherto she had received them with circumspection, compelling respect. Tonight she was recklessly gay, impudent, almost wanton. He spoke of it gently to her as they walked home together, counseling more prudence in the future. "We are not married yet," she told him tartly. "Wait until then before you criticize my conduct." "I trust that there will be no occasion then," said he. "You trust?" "Ah, yes. You are very trusting. Clymene, I have offended you. I am sorry." "It is nothing," said she. "You are what you are." Still was he not concerned. He perceived the source of her ill humor, understood whilst deploring it, and, because he understood, forgave. He perceived also that her ill humor was shared by her father, and by this he was frankly amused. Towards M. Beneath tolerant contempt was the only feeling that complete acquaintance could beget. As for the rest of the company, they were disposed to be very kindly towards Scaramouche. It was almost as if in reality he had fallen from the high estate to which their own imaginations had raised him. Or possibly it was because they saw the effect which that fall from his temporary and fictitious elevation had produced upon Clymene. Leandre alone made himself an exception. His habitual melancholy seemed to be dispelled at last, and his eyes gleamed now with malicious satisfaction when they rested upon Scaramouche, whom occasionally he continued to address with sly mockery as Mon Prince. On the morrow, André-Louis saw but little of Clymene. This was not in itself extraordinary, for he was very hard at work again, with preparations now for Figaro's Scaramouche, which was to be played on Saturday. Also, in addition to his manifold theatrical occupations, he now devoted an hour every morning to the study of fencing in an academy of arms. This was done not only to repair an omission in his education, but also and chiefly to give him added grace and poise upon the stage. He found his mind that morning distracted by thoughts of both Clymene and Aline, and oddly enough it was Aline who provided the deeper perturbation. Clymene's attitude he regarded as a passing phase which need not seriously engage him, but the thought of Aline's conduct towards him kept rankling, and still more deeply rankled the thought of her possible betrothal to M. de la Tour d'Azur. This it was that brought forcibly to his mind the self-imposed, but by now half-forgotten mission, that he had made his own. He had boasted that he would make the voice which M. de la Tour d'Azur had sought to silence ring through the length and breadth of the land. And what had he done of all this that he had boasted? He had incited the mob of Rennes and the mob of Nantes in such terms as poor Philippe might have employed, and then because of hue and cry, he had fled like a cur and taken shelter in the first kennel that offered, there to lie quiet and devote himself to other things, self-seeking things. What a fine contrast between the promise and the fulfillment! Thus André-Louis to himself in his self-contempt, and whilst he trifled away his time and played Scaramouche, and centered all his hopes in presently becoming the rival of such men as Chenier and Mercier, M. de la Tour d'Azur, when his proud ways unchallenged and wrought his will. It was idle to tell himself that the seed he had sown was bearing fruit, that the demands he had voiced in Nantes for the Third Estate had been granted by M. Necker, thanks largely to the commotion which his anonymous speech had made. That was not his concern or his mission. It was no part of his concern to set about the regeneration of mankind, or even the regeneration of the social structure of France. His concern was to see that M. de la Tour d'Azur paid to the uttermost liard for the brutal wrong he had done Philippe de Vilmorin, and it did not increase his self-respect to find that the danger in which Aline stood of being married to the Marquis was the real spur to his rancor and to remembrance of his vow. He was, too unjustly, perhaps, disposed to dismiss as mere sophistries his own arguments that there was nothing he could do, that, in fact, he had but show his head to find himself going to Rennes under arrest and making his final exit from the world stage by way of the gallows. It is impossible to read that part of the Confessions without feeling a certain pity for him. You realize what must have been his state of mind. You realize what a prey he was to emotions so conflicting. And if you have the imagination that will enable you to put yourself in his place, you will also realize how impossible was any decision save the one to which he says he came, that he would move at the first moment that he perceived in what direction it would serve his real aims to move. It happened that the first person he saw when he took the stage on that Thursday evening was Aline. The second was the Marquis de la Tour d'Azur. They occupied a box on the right of, and immediately above, the stage. There were others with them, notably a thin, elderly, resplendent lady whom André-Louis supposed to be Madame la Comtesse de Sautron. But at the time he had no eye for any but those two, who of late had so haunted his thoughts. The sight of either of them would have been sufficiently disconcerting. The sight of both together very nearly made him forget the purpose for which he had come upon the stage. Then he pulled himself together and played. He played, he says, with an unusual nerve, and never in all that brief but eventful career of his was he more applauded. That was the evening's first shock. The next came after the second act. Entering the green room, he found it more thronged than usual. At the far end was Clymene, over whom he was bending from his fine height, his eyes intent upon her face. What time his smiling lips moved in talk, and de la tour d'azur. He had her entirely to himself, a privilege none of the men of fashion, who were in the habit of visiting the coulisses, had yet enjoyed. Those lesser gentlemen had all withdrawn before the marquis, as jackals withdraw before the lion. André-Louis stared a moment, stricken. Then, recovering from his surprise, he became critical in his study of the marquis. He considered the beauty and grace and splendor of him, his courtly air, his complete and unshakable self-possession. But more than all, he considered the expression of the dark eyes that were devouring Clymene's lovely face, and his own lips tightened. De la tour d'azur never heeded him or his stare, nor had he done so, would he have known who it was that looked at him from behind the makeup of Scaramouche. Nor, again, had he known, would he have been in the least troubled or concerned. André-Louis sat down apart, his mind in turmoil. Presently he found a mincing young gentleman addressing him, and made shift to answer as was expected. Clymene having been thus sequestered, and Columbine being already thickly besieged by gallants, the lesser visitors had content themselves with Madame and the male members of the troupe. Binet, indeed, was the center of a gay cluster that shook with laughter at his sallies. He seemed of a sudden to have emerged from the gloom of the last 2 days into high good humor, and Scaramouche observed how persistently his eyes kept flickering upon his daughter and her splendid courtier. That night there were a high word between André-Louis and Clymene, the high words proceeding from Clymene, when André-Louis again and more insistently enjoined prudence upon his betrothed, and begged her to beware how far she encouraged the advances of such a man as de la tour d'azur. She became roundly abusive. She shocked and stunned him by her virulently shrewish tone, and her still more unexpected force of invective. He sought to reason with her, and finally she came to certain terms with him. If you have become betrothed to me simply to stand as an obstacle in my path, the sooner we make an end the better. You do not love me then, Clymene? Love has nothing to do with it. I'll not tolerate your insensate jealousy. A girl in the theater must make it her business to accept homage from all. Agreed. And there is no harm, provided she gives nothing in exchange. White-faced, with flaming eyes, she turned on him at that. Now, what exactly do you mean? My meaning is clear. A girl in your position may receive all the homage that is offered, provided she receives with dignified aloofness, implying clearly that she has no favors to bestow in return beyond the favor of her smile. If she is wise, she will see to it that the homage is always offered collectively by her admirers, and that no single one amongst them shall ever have the privilege of approaching her alone. If she is wise, she will give no encouragement, nourish no hopes that it may afterwards be beyond her power to deny realization. How? You dare? I know my world, and I know him de la tour d'azur, he answered her. He is a man without charity, without humanity almost, a man who takes what he wants wherever he finds it, and whether it is given willingly or not, a man who reckons nothing of the misery he scatters on a self-indulgent way, a man whose only law is force. Ponder it, Clymene, and ask yourself if I do less than honor in warning you. He went out on that, feeling a degradation in continuing the subject. The days that followed were unhappy days for him, and for at least one other. That other was Leandre, who was cast into profoundest dejection by de la tour d'azur's assiduous attendance upon Clymene. The Marquis was to be seen at every performance. A box was perpetually reserved for him, and invariably he came either alone or else with his cousin de Chamberlain. On Tuesday of the following week, André-Louis went out alone early in the morning. He was out of temper, fretted by an overwhelming sense of humiliation, and he hoped to clear his mind by walking. In turning the corner of the Place du Buffet, he ran into a slightly built, sallow-complexioned gentleman, very neatly dressed in black, wearing a tie wig under a round hat. The man fell back at sight of him, leveling a spyglass, then hailed in a voice that rang with amazement. "Moreau, where the devil have you been hiding yourself these months?" It was Le Chapelier, the lawyer, the leader of the literary chamber of Rennes. "Behind the skirts of Thespis," said Scaramouche. "I don't understand. I didn't intend that you should. What of yourself, Isaac? And what of the world which seems to have been standing still of late?" "Standing still." Le Chapelier laughed. "But where have you been, then?" "Standing still." He pointed across the square to a cafe under the shadow of the gloomy prison. "Let us go and drink a Bavaroise. You are of all men the man we want, the man we have been seeking everywhere, and behold, you drop from the skies into my path." They crossed the square and entered the cafe. "So, you think the world has been standing still? Dieu de Dieu. I suppose you haven't heard of the royal order for the convocation of the States General, or the terms of them, that we are to have what you demanded for us here in Nantes. You haven't heard that the order has gone forth for the primary elections, the elections of the electors. You haven't heard of the fresh uproar in Rennes. Last month, the order was that the three estates should sit together at the States General of the bailliages. But in the bailliage of Rennes, the nobles must ever be recalcitrant. They took up arms, actually, 600 of them with their valetaille, headed by your old friend La Tordazzer, and they were for slashing us, the members of the Third Estate, into ribbons so as to put an end to our insolence." He laughed delicately. "But, by God, we showed them that we, too, could take up arms. It was what you yourself advocated here in Nantes last November. We fought them a pitched battle in the streets, under the leadership of your namesake Moreau, the provost, and we so peppered them that they were glad to take shelter in the Cordelier convent. That is the end of their resistance to the royal authority and the people's will." He ran on at great speed, detailing the events that had taken place, and finally came to the matter which had, he announced, been causing him to hunt for André-Louis until he had all but despaired of finding him. Nantes was sending 50 delegates to the Assembly of Rennes, which was to select the deputies to the Third Estate and edit their cahier of grievances. Rennes itself was being as fully represented, while such villages as Gavrillac were sending 2 delegates for every 200 hearths or less. Each of these 3 had clamored that André-Louis Moreau should be one of its delegates. Gavrillac wanted him because he belonged to the village, and it was known there what sacrifices he had made in the popular cause. Rennes wanted him because it had heard his spirited address on the day of the shooting of the students. And Nantes, to whom his identity was unknown, asked for him as the speaker who had addressed them under the name of Omnes Omnibus, and who had framed for them the memorial that was believed so largely to have influenced M. Necker in formulating the terms of the convocation. Since he could not be found, the delegations had been made up without him. But now it happened that 1 or 2 vacancies had occurred in the Nantes representation, and it was the business of filling these vacancies that had brought Le Chapelier to Nantes. André-Louis firmly shook his head in answer to Le Chapelier's proposal. "You refuse," the other cried. "Are you mad? Refuse, when you are demanded from so many sides. Do you realize that it is more than probable you will be elected one of the deputies, that you will be sent to the States General at Versailles to represent us in this work of saving France?" But André-Louis, we know, was not concerned to save France. At the moment, he was concerned to save 2 women, both of whom he loved, though in vastly different ways, from a man he had vowed to ruin. He stood firm in his refusal until the Chapelier dejectedly abandoned the attempt to persuade him. "It is odd," said André-Louis, "that I should have been so deeply immersed in trifles as never to perceive that Nantes is being politically active. Active? My friend, it is a seething cauldron of political emotions. It is kept quiet on the surface only by the persuasion that all goes well. At a hint to the contrary, it would boil over." "Would it so?" said Scaramouche, thoughtfully. "The knowledge may be useful." And then he changed the subject. "You know that La Tordazzer is here? In Nantes? He has courage if he shows himself. They are not a docile people, these Nantais, and they know his record and the part he played in the rising at Rennes. I marvel they haven't stoned him, but they will sooner or later. It only needs that someone should suggest it. That is very likely, said André-Louis, and smiled. He doesn't show himself much, not in the streets, at least, so that he has not the courage you suppose, nor any kind of courage, as I told him once. He has only insolence. At parting, Le Chapelier again exhorted him to give thought to what he proposed. Send me word if you change your mind. I am lodged at the Surf, and I shall be here until the day after tomorrow. If you have ambition, this is your moment. I have no ambition, I suppose, said André-Louis, and went his way. That night at the theater, he had a mischievous impulse to test what Le Chapelier had told him of the state of public feeling in the city. They were playing the terrible captain, in the last act of which the empty cowardice of the bullying braggart Rhodomont is revealed by Scaramouche. After the laughter which the exposure of the roaring captain invariably produced, it remained for Scaramouche contemptuously to dismiss him in a phrase that varied nightly, according to the inspiration of the moment. This time he chose to give his phrase a political complexion. Thus, O Thrasonical coward, is your emptiness exposed, because of your long length and the great sword you carry and the angle at which you cock your hat. People have gone in fear of you, have believed in you, have imagined you to be as terrible and as formidable as you instantly make yourself appear. But at the first touch of true spirit you crumple up, you tremble, you whine pitifully, and the great sword remains in your scabbard. You remind me of the privileged orders when confronted by the Third Estate. It was audacious of him, and he was prepared for anything, a laugh, applause, indignation, or all together. But he was not prepared for what came, and it came so suddenly and spontaneously from the groundlings and the body of those in the amphitheater that he was almost scared by it, as a boy may be scared who has held a match to a sun-scorched herrick. It was a hurricane of furious applause. Men leapt to their feet, sprang up onto the benches, waving their hats in the air, deafening him with the terrific uproar of their acclamations. And it rolled on, nor ceased until the curtain fell. Scaramouche stood meditatively smiling with tight lips. At the last moment he had caught a glimpse of M. de la Tour d'Azur's face thrust farther forward than usual from the shadows of his box, and it was a face set in anger, with eyes on fire. "Mon Dieu!" laughed Rhodomont, recovering from the real scare that had succeeded his histrionic terror. "But you have a great trick of tickling them in the right place, Scaramouche." Scaramouche looked up at him and smiled. "It can be useful upon occasion," said he, and went off to his dressing room to change. But a reprimand awaited him. He was delayed at the theater by matters concerned with the scenery of the new piece they were to mount upon the morrow. By the time he was rid of the business, the rest of the company had long since left. He called a chair and had himself carried back to the inn in solitary state. It was one of many minor luxuries his comparatively affluent present circumstances permitted. Coming into that upstairs room that was common to all the troupe, he found M. Binet talking loudly and vehemently. He had caught sounds of his voice whilst yet upon the stairs. As he entered, Binet broke off short and wheeled to face him. "You are here at last." It was so odd a greeting that André-Louis did no more than look his mild surprise. "I await your explanations of the disgraceful scene you provoked tonight." "Disgraceful? Is it disgraceful that the public should applaud me?" "The public? The rabble? You mean, do you want to deprive us of the patronage of all gentlefolk by vulgar appeals to the low passions of the mob?" André-Louis stepped past M. Binet and forward to the table. He shrugged contemptuously. The man offended him. "After all, you exaggerate grossly, as usual." "I do not exaggerate, and I am the master in my own theater. This is a Binet troupe, and it shall be conducted in the Binet way." "Who are the gentlefolk the loss of whose patronage to the Fedor will be so poignantly felt?" asked André-Louis. "You imply that there are none? See how wrong you are. After the play tonight, M. Le Marquis de la Tour d'Azur came to me and spoke to me in the severest terms about your scandalous outburst. I was forced to apologize, and—" "The more fool you," said André-Louis. "A man who respected himself would have shown that gentleman the door." M. Binet's face began to empurple. "You call yourself the head of the Binet troupe. You boast that you will be master in your own theater, and you stand like a lackey to take the orders of the first insolent fellow who comes to your green room to tell you that he does not like a line spoken by one of your company. I say again that had you really respected yourself, you would have turned him out. There was a murmur of approval from several members of the company who, having heard the arrogant tone assumed by the Marquis, were filled with resentment against the slur cast upon them all. And I say further, André-Louis went on, the man who respected himself on quite other grounds would have been only too glad to have seized this pretext to show him the la tour d'azur the door. What do you mean by that? There was a rumble of thunder in the question. André-Louis' eyes swept round the company assembled at the supper table. Where's Clymene? He asked, sharply. Leandre leapt up to answer him, white in the face, tense and quivering with excitement. She left the theater in the Marquis de la Tour d'Azur's carriage immediately after the performance. We heard him offer to drive her to this inn. André-Louis glanced at the timepiece on the overmantel. He seemed unnaturally calm. That would be an hour ago, rather more, and she has not yet arrived. His eyes sought M. Benet's. M. Benet's eyes eluded his glance. Again it was Leandre who answered him. Not yet. Ah. André-Louis sat down and poured himself wine. There was an oppressive silence in the room. Leandre watched him expectantly, Columbine commiseratingly. Even M. Benet appeared to be waiting for a cue from Scaramouche. But Scaramouche disappointed him. Have you left me anything to eat? He asked. Platters were pushed towards him. He helped himself calmly to food and ate in silence, apparently with a good appetite. Benet sat down, poured himself wine, and drank. Presently he attempted to make conversation with one and another. He was answered curtly in monosyllables. Benet did not appear to be in favor with his troop that night. At long length came a rumble of wheels below and a rattle of halting hooves. Then voices, the high, trilling laugh of Clymene floating upwards. André-Louis went on eating unconcernedly. What an actor, said Harlequin under his breath to Polichinelle, and Polichinelle nodded gloomily. She came in, a leading lady taking the stage, head high, chin thrust forward, eyes dancing with laughter. She expressed triumph and arrogance. Her cheeks were flushed, and there was some disorder in the mass of nut-brown hair that crowned her head. In her left hand she carried an enormous bouquet of white camellias. On its middle finger a diamond of great price drew almost at once by its effulgence the eyes of all. Her father sprang to meet her with an unusual display of paternal tenderness. At last, my child! He conducted her to the table. She sank into a chair, a little wearily, a little nervelessly, but the smile did not leave her face, not even when she glanced across at Scaramouche. It was only Leandre, observing her closely, with hungry, scowling stare, who detected something as of fear in the hazel eyes momentarily seen between the fluttering of her lids. André-Louis, however, still went on eating stolidly, without so much as a look in her direction. Gradually the company came to realize that just as surely as a scene was brooding, just so surely would there be no scene as long as they remained. It was Polichinelle at last who gave the signal by rising and withdrawing, and within 2 minutes none remained in the room but M. Benet, his daughter, and André-Louis. And then, at last, André-Louis set down knife and fork, washed his throat with a draught of Burgundy, and sat back in his chair to consider Clymene. I trust, said he, that you had a pleasant ride, mademoiselle. Most pleasant, monsieur. Impudently she strove to emulate his coolness, but did not completely succeed. And not unprofitable, if I may judge that jewel at this distance. It should be worth at least a couple of hundred louis, and that is a formidable sum even to so wealthy a nobleman as M. de la Tour d'Azur. Would it be impertinent in one who has had some notion of becoming your husband to ask you, mademoiselle, what you have given him in return? Benet uttered a gross laugh, a queer mixture of cynicism and contempt. I have given nothing, said Clymene indignantly. Ah, then the jewel is in the nature of a payment in advance. My God, man, you're not decent. Benet protested. Decent? André-Louis' smoldering eyes turned to discharge upon M. Benet such a fulmination of contempt that the old scoundrel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Did you mention decency, Benet? Almost you make me lose my temper, which is a thing that I detest above all others. Slowly his glance returned to Clymene, who sat with elbows on the table, her chin cupped in her palms, regarding him with something between scorn and defiance. Mademoiselle, he said slowly, I desire you purely in your own interest to consider whither you are going. I am well able to consider for myself, and to decide without advice from you, monsieur. And now you've got your answer, chuckled Binet. I hope you like it. André-Louis had paled a little. There was incredulity in his great somber eyes as they continued steadily to regard her. Of Binet he took no notice. Surely, mademoiselle, you cannot mean that willingly. With open eyes and full understanding of what you do, you exchange an honorable wifehood for the thing that such men as de la Tour d'Azur may have in store for you? Binet made a wide gesture and swung to his daughter. You hear him, the mealy-mouthed prude. Perhaps you'll believe at last that marriage with him would be the ruin of you. He would always be there, the inconvenient husband, to mar your every chance, my girl. She tossed her lovely head in agreement with her father. I begin to find him tiresome with his silly jealousies, she confessed. As a husband, I am afraid he would be impossible. André-Louis felt constriction of the heart. But, always the actor, he showed nothing of it. He laughed a little, not very pleasantly, and rose. I bow to your choice, mademoiselle. I pray that you may not regret it. Regret it? Cried Binet. He was laughing, relieved to see his daughter at last rid of this suitor of whom he had never approved, if we accept those few hours when he really believed him to be an eccentric of distinction. And what shall she regret? That she accepted the protection of a nobleman so powerful and wealthy that as a mere trinket, he gives her a jewel worth as much as an actress earns in a year at the Comédie Française. He got up and advanced towards André-Louis. His mood became conciliatory. Come, my friend, no rancor now. What the devil? You wouldn't stand in the girl's way? You can't really blame her for making this choice. Have you thought what it means to her? Have you thought that under protection of such a gentleman, there are no heights which she may not reach? Don't you see the wonderful luck of it? Surely, if you're fond of her, particularly being of a jealous temperament, you wouldn't wish it otherwise. André-Louis looked at him in silence for a long moment. Then he laughed again. Oh, you are fantastic, he said. You are not real. He turned on his heel and strode to the door. The action, and more the contempt of his look, laugh, and words stung Binet to passion, drove out the conciliatoriness of his mood. Fantastic are we, he cried, turned to follow the departing Scaramouche with his little eyes that now were inexpressibly evil. Fantastic that we should prefer the powerful protection of this great nobleman to marriage with a beggarly, nameless bastard. Oh, we are fantastic. André-Louis turned, his hand upon the door handle. No, he said, I was mistaken. You are not fantastic. You are just vile, both of you. And he went out. Chapter 10, Contrition. Emily de Kercadia walked with her aunt in the bright morning sunshine of a Sunday in March on the broad terrace of the Château de Sautron. For one of her natural sweetness of disposition, she had been oddly irritable of late, manifesting signs of a cynical worldliness, which convinced Madame de Sautron more than ever that her brother Quentin had scandalously conducted the child's education. She appeared to be instructed in all the things of which a girl is better ignorant, and ignorant of all the things that a girl should know. That at least was the point of view of Madame de Sautron. Tell me, madame, quoth Aline, are all men beasts? Unlike her brother, Madame la Comtesse was tall and majestically built. In the days before her marriage with M. de Sautron, ill-natured folk described her as the only man in the family. She looked down now from her noble height upon her little niece with startled eyes. Really, Aline, you have a trick of asking the most disconcerting and improper questions. Perhaps it is because I find life disconcerting and improper. Life? A young girl should not discuss life. Why not, since I am alive? You do not suggest that it is an impropriety to be alive. It is an impropriety for a young unmarried girl to seek to know too much about life. As for your absurd question about men, when I remind you that man is the noblest work of God, perhaps you will consider yourself answered. Madame de Sautron did not invite a pursuance of the subject, but Emily de Kercadia's outrageous rearing had made her headstrong. That being so, said she, will you tell me why they find such an overwhelming attraction in the modest of our sex? Madame stood still and raised shocked hands. Then she looked down her handsome, high-bridged nose. Sometimes, often, in fact, my dear Aline, you pass all understanding. I shall write to Quentin that the sooner you are married, the better it will be for all. Uncle Quentin has left that matter to my own deciding, Aline reminded her. That, said Madame with complete conviction, is the last and most outrageous of his errors. Who ever heard of a girl being left to decide the matter of her own marriage? It is indelicate almost to expose her thoughts of such things. Madame de Sautrin shuddered. Quentin is a boor. His conduct is unheard of. That M. de la Tour d'Azur should parade himself before you, so that you may make up your mind whether he is the proper man for you. Again she shuddered. It is of a grossness, of a prurience almost. Mon Dieu, when I married your uncle, all this was arranged between our parents. I first saw him when he came to sign the contract. I should have died of shame had it been otherwise. And that is how these affairs should be conducted. You are no doubt right, madam. But since that is not how my own case is being conducted, you will forgive me if I deal with it apart from others. M. de la Tour d'Azur desires to marry me. He has been permitted to pay his court. I should be glad to have him informed that he may cease to do so. Madame de Sautrin stood still, petrified by amazement. Her long face turned white. She seemed to breathe with difficulty. But, what are you saying? She gasped. Quietly, Aline repeated her statement. But this is outrageous. You cannot be permitted to play fast and loose with a gentleman of M. Le Marquis quality. Why? It is little more than a week since you permitted him to be informed that you would become his wife. I did so in a moment of rashness. Since then, M. Le Marquis' own conduct has convinced me of my error. But, mon Dieu, cried the Countess, are you blind to the great honor that is being paid you? M. Le Marquis will make you the first lady in Brittany. Yet, little fool that you are, and greater fool that Quentin is, you trifle with this extraordinary good fortune. Let me warn you. She raised an admonitory forefinger. If you continue in this stupid humor, M. de la Tour d'Azur may definitely withdraw his offer and depart in justified mortification. That, madam, as I am endeavoring to convey to you, is what I most desire. Oh, you are mad. It may be, madam, that I am sane in preferring to be guided by my instincts. It may be even that I am justified in resenting that the man who aspires to become my husband should at the same time be paying such assiduous homage to a wretched theater girl at the Feydeau. Aline, is it not true? Or perhaps you do not find it strange that M. de la Tour d'Azur should so conduct himself at such a time. Aline, you are so extraordinary a mixture. At moments you shock me by the indecency of your expressions. At others you amaze me by the excess of your prudery. You have been brought up like a little bourgeoise, I think. Yes, that is it, a little bourgeoise. Quentin was always something of a shopkeeper at heart. I was asking your opinion on the conduct of M. de la Tour d'Azur, madam, not on my own. But it is an indelicacy in you to observe such things. You should be ignorant of them, and I can't think who is so unfeeling as to inform you. But since you are informed, at least you should be modestly blind to things that take place outside the orbit of a properly conducted demoiselle. Will they still be outside my orbit when I am married? If you are wise, you should remain without knowledge of them. It deflowers your innocence. I would not for the world that M. de la Tour d'Azur should know you so extraordinarily instructed. Had you been properly reared in a convent, this would never have happened to you. But you do not answer me, madam, cried Aline in despair. It is not my chastity that is in question, but that of M. de la Tour d'Azur. Chastity. Madame's lips trembled with horror. Horror overspread her face. Wherever did you learn that dreadful, that so improper word? And then Madame de Sautrin did violence to her feelings. She realized that here great calm and prudence were required. My child, since you know so much that you ought not to know, there could be no harm in my adding that a gentleman must have these little distractions. But why, madam? Why is it so? Ah, mon Dieu, you are asking me riddles of nature. It is so because it is so. Because men are like that. Because men are beasts, you mean, which is what I began by asking you. You are incorrigibly stupid, Aline. You mean that I do not see things as you do, madam. I am not over-expectant, as you appear to think. Yet surely I have a right to expect that whilst M. de la Tour d'Azur is wooing me, he shall not be wooing at the same time a drab at a theater. I feel that in this there is a subtle association of myself with that unspeakable creature which soils and insults me. The Marquis is a dullard whose wooing takes a form at best of stilted compliments, stupid and unoriginal. They gain nothing when they fall from lips still warm from the contamination of that woman's kisses. So utterly scandalized was Madame that for a moment she remained speechless. Then, "Mon Dieu!" she exclaimed. "I should never have suspected you of so indelicate an imagination. I cannot help it, Madame. Each time his lips touch my fingers, I find myself thinking of the last object that they touched. I at once retire to wash my hands. Next time, Madame, unless you are good enough to convey my message to him, I shall call for water and wash them in his presence. But what am I to tell him? How? In what words can I convey such a message?" Madame was aghast. "Be frank with him, Madame. It is easiest in the end. Tell him that however impure may have been his life in the past, however impure he intend that it shall be in the future, he must at least study purity, whilst approaching with view to marriage a virgin who is herself pure and without stain." Madame recoiled and put her hands to her ears. Horror stamped on her handsome face. Her massive bosom heaved. "Oh, how can you," she panted, "how can you make use of such terrible expressions? Wherever have you learnt them?" "In church," said Aline. "Ah! But in church many things are said that one would not dream of saying in the world. My dear child, how could I possibly say such a thing to M. le Marquis? How could I possibly? Shall I say it?" "Aline!" "Well, there it is," said Aline. "Something must be done to shelter me from insult. I am utterly disgusted with M. le Marquis, a disgusting man. And however fine a thing it may be to become Marquise de la Tour d'Azur, why, frankly, I'd sooner marry a cobbler who practiced decency." Such was her vehemence and obvious determination that Madame de Sautrin fetched herself out of her despair to attempt persuasion. Aline was her niece, and such a marriage in the family would be to the credit of the whole of it. At all costs, nothing must frustrate it. "Listen, my dear," she said. "Let's reason. Le Marquis is away and will not be back until tomorrow." "True, and I know where he has gone, or at least whom he has gone with. Mon Dieu. And the drab has a father and a lot of fellow who intends to make her his wife, and neither of them chooses to do anything. I suppose they agree with you, Madame, that a great gentleman must have his little distractions." Her contempt was as scorching as a thing of fire. "However, Madame, you were about to say that on the day after tomorrow you are returning to Gavrillac. M. de la Tour d'Azur will most likely follow at his leisure. You mean when this dirty candle is burnt out? Call it what you will. Madame, you see, despair by now controlling the impropriety of her niece's expressions. At Gavrillac there will be no Amélie Binet. This thing will be in the past. It is unfortunate that he should have met her at such a moment. The chit is very attractive. After all, you cannot deny that, and you must make allowances. Le Marquis formally proposed to me a week ago, partly to satisfy the wishes of the family, and partly," she broke off, hesitating a moment, to resume on a note of dull pain, "partly because it does not seem greatly to matter whom I marry. I gave him my consent. That consent, for the reasons I've given you, Madame, I desire now definitely to withdraw." Madame fell into agitation of the wildest. "Aline, I should never forgive you. Your Uncle Quentin would be in despair. You do not know what you are saying. What a wonderful thing you are refusing. Have you no sense of your position, of the station into which you were born? If I had not, Madame, I should have made an end long since. If I have tolerated this suit for a single moment, it is because I realize the importance of a suitable marriage in the worldly sense. But I ask of marriage something more, and Uncle Quentin has placed a decision in my hands." "God forgive him," said Madame. And then she hurried on. "Leave this to me now, Aline. Be guided by me. Oh, be guided by me." Her tone was beseeching. "I will take counsel with your Uncle Charles. But do not definitely decide until this unfortunate affair is blown over. Charles will know how to arrange it. Le Marquis shall do penance, child, since your tyranny demands it, but not in sackcloth and ashes. You'll not ask so much. Aline shrugged. I ask nothing at all, she said, which was neither assent nor dissent. So Madame de Sautrin interviewed her husband, a slight, middle-aged man, very aristocratic in appearance and gifted with a certain shrewd sense. She took with him precisely the tone that Aline had taken with herself, and which in Aline she had found so disconcertingly indelicate. She even borrowed several of Aline's phrases. The result was that on the Monday afternoon, when at last M. de la Tourdiazer's returning Berlin drove up to the chateau, he was met by M. Le Comte de Sautrin, who desired a word with him even before he changed. Gervais, you're a fool, was the excellent opening made by M. Le Comte. Charles, you give me no news, answered M. Le Marquis. Of what particular folly do you take the trouble to complain? He flung himself wearily upon a sofa, and his long, graceful body sprawling there. He looked up at his friend with a tired smile on that nobly handsome pale face that seemed to defy the onslaught of age. Of your last, this Binet girl. That? Pooh! An incident. Hardly a folly. A folly at such a time, Sautrin insisted. The Marquis looked a question. The Count answered it. Aline, said he pregnantly, she knows. How she knows I can't tell you, but she knows, and she is deeply offended. The smile perished on the Marquis' face. He gathered himself up. Offended? Said he, and his voice was anxious. But yes, you know what she is. You know the ideal she has formed. It wounds her that at such a time, whilst you are here for the purpose of wooing her, you should at the same time be pursuing this affair of that chit of Binet girl. How do you know? Asked La Tourdiazer. She has confided in her aunt, and the poor child seems to have some reason. She says she will not tolerate that you should come to kiss her hand with lips that are still contaminated from... Oh, you understand. You appreciate the impression of such a thing upon a pure, sensitive girl, such as Aline. She said, I had better tell you that the next time you kiss her hand, she will call for water and wash it in your presence. The Marquis' face flamed scarlet. He rose. Knowing his violent, intolerant spirit, M. de Sautrin was prepared for an outburst. But no outburst came. The Marquis turned away from him and paced slowly to window, his head bowed, his hands behind his back. Halted there, he spoke, without turning. His voice was at once scornful and wistful. You are right, Charles. I am a fool, a wicked fool. I have just enough sense left to perceive it. It is the way I have lived, I suppose. I have never known the need to deny myself anything I wanted. Then suddenly he swung round, and the outburst came. But, my God, I want Aline as I have never wanted anything yet. I think I should kill myself in rage, if through my folly I should have lost her. He struck his brow with his hand. I am a beast, he said. I should have known that if that sweet saint got word of these petty devilries of mine, she would despise me. And I tell you, Charles, I go through fire to regain her respect. I hope it is to be regained on easier terms, said Charles, and then to ease a situation which began to irk him by its solemnity, he made a feeble joke. It is merely asked of you that you refrain from going through certain fires that are not accounted by Mademoiselle of too purifying nature. As to that Binet girl, it is finished, said the Marquis. I congratulate you. When did you make that decision? This moment. I would to God I had made it 24 hours ago. As it is, he shrugged. Why, 24 hours of her have been enough for me as they would have been for any man. A mercenary, self-seeking little baggage with the soul of a troll. Bah! He shuddered in disgust of himself and her. Ah, that makes it easier for you, said M. de Sautrin, cynically. Don't say it, Charles. It is not so. Had you been less of a fool, you would have warned me sooner. I may prove to have warned you soon enough, if you'll profit by the warning. There is no penance I will not do. I will prostrate myself at her feet. I will abase myself before her. I will make confession in the proper spirit of contrition, and heaven helping me, I'll keep to my purpose of amendment for her sweet sake. He was tragically in earnest. To M. de Sautrin, who had never seen him other than self-contained, supercilious, and mocking, this was an amazing revelation. He shrank from it almost. It gave him the feeling of prying, of peeping through a keyhole. He slapped his friend's shoulder. My dear Gervais, here is a magnificently romantic mood. Enough said. Keep to it, and I promise you that all will presently be well. I will be your ambassador, and you shall have no cause to complain. But may I not go to her myself? If you are wise, you will at once efface yourself. Write to her if you will. Make your act of contrition by letter. I will explain why you have gone without seeing her. I will tell her that you did so upon my advice, and I will do it tactfully. I am a good diplomat. Gervais, trust me. Le Marquis raised his head and showed a face that pain was searing. He held out his hand. Very well, Charles. Serve me in this, and count me your friend in all things. Chapter 11. The Fracas at the Theatre Feydeau. Leaving his host to act as his plenipotentiary with Mademoiselle de Circadia, and to explain to her that it was a profound contrition that compelled him to depart without taking formal leave of her, the Marquis rolled away from Sautron in a cloud of gloom. 24 hours with La Binet had been more than enough for a man of his fastidious and discerning taste. He looked back upon the episode with nausea, the inevitable psychological reaction, marveling at himself that until yesterday he should have found her so desirable, and cursing himself that for the sake of that ephemeral and worthless gratification, he should seriously have imperiled his chances of winning Mademoiselle de Circadia to wife. There is, after all, nothing very extraordinary in his frame of mind, so that I need not elaborate it further. It resulted from the conflict between the beast and the angel that go to make up the composition of every man. The Chevalier de Chamberlain, who in reality occupied towards the Marquis a position akin to that of gentleman in waiting, sat opposite to him in the enormous traveling berlin. A small folding table had been erected between them, and the Chevalier suggested piquet. But Le Marquis was in no humor for cards. His thoughts absorbed him. As they were rattling over the cobbles of Nantes streets, he remembered a promise to La Binet to witness a performance that night in The Faithless Lover, and now he was running away from her. The thought was repugnant to him on 2 scores. He was breaking his pledged word, and he was acting like a coward. And there was more than that. He had led the mercenary little strumpet. It was thus he thought of her at present, and with some justice, to expect favors from him in addition to the lavish awards which already he had made her. The baggage had almost sought to drive a bargain with him as to her future. He was to take her to Paris, put her into her own furniture, as the expression ran and still runs, and under the shadow of his powerful protection see that the doors of the great theaters of the capital should be open to her talents. He had not, he was thankful to reflect, exactly committed himself, but neither had he definitely refused her. It became necessary now to come to an understanding, since he was compelled to choose between his trivial passion for her, a passion quenched already, and his deep, almost spiritual devotion to Mademoiselle de Circadia. His honor, he considered, demanded of him that he should at once deliver himself from a false position. La Binet would make a scene, of course, but he knew the proper specific to apply to hysteria of that nature. Money, after all, has its uses. He pulled the cord. The carriage rolled to a standstill. A footman appeared at the door. "To the Theatre Feydeau," said he. The footman vanished, and the berlin rolled on. De Chamberlain laughed cynically. "I'll trouble you not to be amused," snapped the Marquis. "You don't understand." Thereafter he explained himself. It was a rare condescension in him. But then, he could not bear to be misunderstood in such a matter. Chamberlain grew serious in reflection of the Marquis' extreme seriousness. "Why not write?" he suggested. Myself, I confess that I should find it easier. Nothing could better have revealed Le Marquis' state of mind than his answer. Letters are liable both to miscarriage and to misconstruction. 2 risks I will not run. If she did not answer, I should never know which had been incurred, and I shall have no peace of mind until I know that I have set a term to this affair. The berlin can wait while we are at the theater. We will go on afterwards. We will travel all night if necessary. "Peste!" said de Chamberlain with a grimace. But that was all. The great traveling carriage drew up at the lighted portals of the Feydeau, and Le Marquis stepped out. He entered the theater with Chamberlain, all unconsciously to deliver himself into the hands of André-Louis. André-Louis was in a state of exasperation produced by Clymene's long absence from Nantes in the company of Le Marquis, and fed by the unspeakable complacency with which Binet regarded that event of quite unmistakable import. however much he might affect the frame of mind of the Stoics, and seek to judge with complete detachment. In the heart and soul of him, André-Louis was tormented and revolted. It was not Clymene he blamed. He had been mistaken in her. She was just a poor, weak vessel driven helplessly by the first breath, however foul, that promised her advancement. She suffered from the plague of greed, and he congratulated himself upon having discovered it before making her his wife. He felt for her now nothing but a deal of pity and some contempt. The pity was begotten of the love she had lately inspired in him. It might be likened to the dregs of love, all that remained after the potent wine of it had been drained off. His anger he reserved for her father and her seducer, the thoughts that were stirring in him on that Monday morning, when it was discovered that Clymene had not yet returned from her excursion of the previous day in the coach of M. le Marquis, were already wicked enough without the spurring they received from the distraught Leandre. Hitherto the attitude of each of these men toward the other had been one of mutual contempt. The phenomenon has frequently been observed in like cases. Now, what appeared to be a common misfortune brought them into a sort of alliance. So, at least, it seemed to Leandre when he went in quest of André-Louis, who with apparent unconcern was smoking a pipe upon the quay immediately facing the inn. "Name of a pig," said Leandre. "How can you take your ease and smoke at such a time?" Scaramouche surveyed the sky. "I do not find it too cold," said he. "The sun is shining. I am very well here. Do I talk of the weather?" Leandre was very excited. "Of what, then?" "Of Clymene, of course." "Oh, the lady has ceased to interest me," he lied. Leandre stood squarely in front of him, a handsome figure handsomely dressed in these days, his hair well powdered, his stockings of silk. His face was pale. His large eyes looked larger than usual. "Ceased to interest you? Are you not to marry her?" André-Louis expelled a cloud of smoke. "You cannot wish to be offensive, yet you almost suggest that I live on other men's leavings." "My God!" said Leandre, overcome, and he stared a while. Then he burst out afresh. "Are you quite heartless? Are you always Scaramouche?" "What do you expect me to do?" asked André-Louis, evincing surprise in his own turn, but faintly. "I do not expect you to let her go without a struggle, but she has gone already." André-Louis pulled at his pipe a moment, what time Leandre clenched and unclenched his hands in impotent rage. "And to what purpose struggle against the inevitable? Did you struggle when I took her from you? She was not mine to be taken from me. I but aspired, and you won the race. But even had it been otherwise, where is a comparison? That was a thing in honor. This is hell." His emotion moved André-Louis. He took Leandre's arm. "You're a good fellow, Leandre. I am glad I intervened to save you from your fate." "Oh, you don't love her," cried the other passionately. "You never did. You don't know what it means to love, or you'd not talk like this. My God, if she had been my affianced wife and this had happened, I should have killed the man, killed him. Do you hear me? But you, oh, you come out here and smoke and take the air and talk of her as another man's leavings. I wonder I didn't strike you for the word." He tore his arm from the other's grip and looked almost as if he would strike him now. "You should have done it," said André-Louis. "It's in your part." With an imprecation, Leandre turned on his heel to go. André-Louis arrested his departure. "A moment, my friend. Test me by yourself. Would you marry her now?" "Would I?" The young man's eyes blazed with passion. "Would I? Let her say that she will marry me, and I am her slave. Slave is the right word. A slave in hell. It would never be hell to me where she was, whatever she had done. I love her, man. I am not like you. I love her. Do you hear me?" "I have known it for some time," said André-Louis, "though I didn't suspect your attack of the disease to be quite so violent. Well, God knows I loved her, too, quite enough to share your thirst for killing. For myself, the blue blood of La Tour d'Azur would hardly quench this thirst. I should like to add to it the dirty fluid that flows in the veins of the unspeakable Benet." For a second his emotion had been out of hand, and he revealed to Leandre in the mordant tone of those last words something of the fires that burned under his icy exterior. The young man caught him by the hand. "I knew you were acting," said he. You feel as I do. Behold us. fellows in viciousness. I have betrayed myself, it seems. Well, and what now? Do you want to see this pretty marquis torn limb from limb? I might afford you the spectacle. What? Leandre stared, wondering was this another of Scaramouche's cynicisms. It isn't really difficult provided I have aid. I require only a little. Will you lend it me? Anything you ask, Leandre exploded. My life if you require it. André-Louis took his arm again. Let us walk, he said. I will instruct you. When they came back, the company was already at dinner. Mademoiselle had not yet returned. Sullenness presided at the table. Columbine and Madame wore anxious expressions. The fact was that relations between Binet and his troupe were daily growing more strained. André-Louis and Leandre went each to his accustomed place. Binet's little eyes followed them with a malicious gleam. His thick lips pouted into a crooked smile. You two are grown very friendly of a sudden, he mocked. You are a man of discernment, Binet, said Scaramouche, the cold loathing of his voice itself an insult. Perhaps you discern a reason? It is readily discerned. Regale the company with it, he begged, and waited. What? You hesitate? Is it possible that there are limits to your shamelessness? Binet reared his great head. Do you want to quarrel with me, Scaramouche? Thunder was rumbling in his deep voice. Quarrel? You want to laugh. A man doesn't quarrel with creatures like you. We all know the place held in the public esteem by complacent husbands. But, in God's name, what place is there at all for complacent fathers? Binet heaved himself up, a great towering mass of manhood. Violently, he shook off the restraining hand of Pierrot, who sat on his left. 1,000 devils, he roared. If you take that tone with me, I'll break every bone in your filthy body. If you were to lay a finger on me, Binet, you would give me the only provocation I still need to kill you. André-Louis was as calm as ever, and therefore the more menacing. Alarm stirred the company. He protruded from his pocket the butt of a pistol, newly purchased. I go armed, Binet. It is only fair to give you warning. Provoke me as you have suggested, and I'll kill you with no more compunction than I should kill a slug, which after all is the thing you most resemble. A slug, Binet, a fat, slimy body, foulness without soul and without intelligence. When I come to think of it, I can't suffer to sit at table with you. It turns my stomach. He pushed away his platter and got up. I'll go and eat at the ordinary below stairs. Thereupon up jumped Columbine. And I'll come with you, Scaramouche, cried she. It acted like a signal. Had the thing been concerted, it couldn't have fallen out more uniformly. Binet, in fact, was persuaded of a conspiracy. For in the wake of Columbine went Leandre, in the wake of Leandre, Polichinelle, and then all the rest together, until Binet found himself sitting alone at the head of an empty table in an empty room, a badly shaken man whose rage could afford him no support against the dread by which he was suddenly invaded. He sat down to think things out, and he was still at that melancholy occupation when perhaps a half-hour later his daughter entered the room, returned at last from her excursion. She looked pale, even a little scared. In reality, excessively self-conscious now that the ordeal of facing all the company awaited her. Seeing no one but her father in the room, she checked on the threshold. "Where's everybody?" she asked, in a voice rendered natural by effort. Binet reared his great head and turned upon her eyes that were blood-injected. He scowled, blew out his thick lips, and made harsh noises in his throat. Yet he took stock of her, so graceful and comely and looking so completely the lady of fashion in her long, fur-trimmed traveling coat of bottle green, her muff and her broad hat adorned by a sparkling rhinestone buckle above her adorably coiffed brown hair. No need to fear the future, whilst he owned such a daughter. Let Scaramouche play what tricks he would. He expressed, however, none of these comforting reflections. "So you're back at last, little fool," he growled in greeting. "I was beginning to ask myself if we should perform this evening. It wouldn't greatly have surprised me if you had not returned in time. Indeed, since you have chosen to play the fine hand you held in your own way and scorning my advice, nothing can surprise me." She crossed the room to the table, and leaning against it, looked down upon him almost disdainfully. "I have nothing to regret," she said. "So every fool says at first. Nor would you admit it if you had. You are like that. You go your own way in spite of advice from older heads. Death of my life. Girl, what do you know of men? I am not complaining, she reminded him. No, but you may be presently, when you discover that you would have done better to have been guided by your old father. So long as your marquis languished for you, there was nothing you could not have done with the fool. So long as you let him have no more than your fingertips to kiss. Ah, name of a name. That was the time to build your future. If you live to be 1,000, you'll never have such a chance again, and you've squandered it. For what? Mademoiselle sat down. You're sordid, she said, with disgust. Sordid, am I? His thick lips curled again. I have had enough of the dregs of life, and so I should have thought, have you held a hand on which to have won a fortune, if you had played it as I bade you. Well, you've played it, and where's the fortune? We can whistle for that, as a sailor whistles for wind, and, by heaven, we'll need to whistle presently if the weather in the troop continues as it set in. That scoundrel Scaramouche has been at his ape's tricks with them. They've suddenly turned moral. They won't sit at table with me any more. He was spluttering between anger and sardonic mirth. It was your friend Scaramouche set them the example of that. He threatened my life, actually. Threatened my life. Called me. Oh, but what does that matter? What matters is that the next thing to happen to us will be that the Benet troop will discover it can manage without M. Benet and his daughter. This scoundrelly bastard I befriended has little by little robbed me of everything. It's in his power today to rob me of my troop, and the knave's ungrateful enough and vile enough to make use of his power. Let him, said Mademoiselle contemptuously. Let him. He was aghast. And what's to become of us? In no case will the Benet troop interest me much longer, said she. I shall be going to Paris soon. There are better theaters there than the Feydeau. There's Émilie Montansier's theater in the Palais Royal. There's the Ambigu Comique. There's a Comédie Française. There's even a possibility I may have a theater of my own. His eyes grew big for once. He stretched out a fat hand and placed it on one of hers. She noticed that it trembled. Has he promised that? Has he promised? She looked at it with her head on one side, eyes sly, and a queer little smile on her perfect lips. He did not refuse me when I asked it, she answered, with conviction that all was as she desired it. Bah! He withdrew his hand and heaved himself up. There was disgust on his face. He did not refuse, he mocked her, and then with passion. Had you acted as I advised you, he would have consented to anything that you asked, and what is more, he would have provided anything that you asked. Anything that lay within his means, and they are inexhaustible. You have changed a certainty into a possibility, and I hate possibilities. God of God, I have lived on possibilities, and infernally near starved on them. Had she known of the interview taking place at that moment at the Château de Sautrin, she would have laughed less confidently at her father's gloomy forebodings. But she was destined never to know, which indeed was the cruelest punishment of all. She was to attribute all the evil that of a sudden overwhelmed her, the shattering of all the future hopes she had founded upon the Marquis, and the sudden disintegration of Benet troop, to the wicked interference of that villain Scaramouche. She had this much justification that possibly, without the warning from M. de Sautrin, the Marquis would have found in the event of that evening at the Theatre Feydeau a sufficient reason for ending an entanglement that was fraught with too much unpleasant excitement, whilst the breaking up of Benet troop was most certainly the result of André-Louis' work. But it was not a result that he intended or even foresaw. So much was this the case that in the interval after the second act, he sought the dressing room shared by Polichinelle and Rhodomont. Polichinelle was in the act of changing. I shouldn't trouble to change, he said. The piece isn't likely to go beyond my opening scene of the next act with Leandre. What do you mean? You'll see. He put a paper on Polichinelle's table amid the grease paints. Cast your eye over that. It's a sort of last will and testament in favor of the troupe. I was a lawyer once. The document is in order. I relinquish to all of you the share produced by my partnership in the company. But you don't mean that you are leaving us? Cried Polichinelle in alarm, whilst Rhodomont's sudden stare asked the same question. Scaramouche's shrug was eloquent. Polichinelle ran on gloomily. Of course it was to have been foreseen. But why should you be the one to go? It is you who have made us, and it is you who are the real head and brains of the troupe. It is you who have raised it into a real theatrical company. If anyone must go, let it be Benet and his infernal daughter. Or, if you go, name of a name, we all go with you. Aye, added Rhodomont, We've had enough of that fat scoundrel." "I had thought of it, of course," said André-Louis. "It was not vanity, for once. It was trust in your friendship. After tonight we may consider it again, if I survive." "If you survive?" both cried. Polichinelle got up. "Now, what madness have you in mind?" he asked. "For one thing, I think I am indulging Leandre. For another, I am pursuing an old quarrel." The 3 knocks sounded as he spoke. "There, I must go. Keep that paper, Polichinelle. After all, it may not be necessary." He was gone. Rhodomont stared at Polichinelle. Polichinelle stared at Rhodomont. "What the devil is he thinking of?" Quoth the latter. "That is most readily ascertained by going to see," replied Polichinelle. He completed changing in haste, and despite what Scaramouche had said, and then followed with Rhodomont. As they approached the wings, a roar of applause met them coming from the audience. It was applause and something else. Applause on an unusual note. As it faded away, they heard the voice of Scaramouche ringing clear as a bell. "And so you see, my dear Leandre, that when you speak of the third estate, it is necessary to be more explicit. What precisely is a third estate?" "Nothing," said Leandre. There was a gasp from the audience, audible in the wings, and then swiftly followed Scaramouche's next question. "True. Alas! But what should it be?" "Everything," said Leandre. The audience roared its acclamations, the more violent because of the unexpectedness of that reply. "True again," said Scaramouche. "And what is more, that is what it will be. That is what already is. Do you doubt it?" "I hope it," said the schooled Leandre. "You may believe it," said Scaramouche, and again the acclamations rolled into thunder. Polichinelle and Rhodomont exchanged glances. Indeed, the former winked, not without mirth. "Sacred name," growled a voice behind them. "Is the scoundrel at his political tricks again?" They turned to confront M. Benet, moving with that noiseless tread of his. He had come up unheard behind them, and there he stood now in his scarlet suit of pantaloon under a trailing bedgown, his little eyes glaring from either side of his false nose. But their attention was held by the voice of Scaramouche. He had stepped to the front of the stage. "He doubts it," he was telling the audience. "But then this Leandre is himself akin to those who worship the worm-eaten idol of privilege, and so he is a little afraid to believe a truth that is becoming apparent to all the world. Shall I convince him? Shall I tell him how a company of noblemen backed by their servants under arms, 600 men in all, sought to dictate to the third estate of Rennes a few short weeks ago? Must I remind him of the martial front shown on that occasion by the third estate, and how they swept the streets clean of that rabble of nobles? Set canaille noble." Applause interrupted him. The phrase had struck home and caught. Those who had writhed under that infamous designation from their betters leapt at this turning of it against the nobles themselves. "But let me tell you their leader, Lupin's noble de cette canaille. Oh, you bien le plus canaille de CS nobles. You know him, that one. He fears many things, but the voice of truth he fears most. With such as him, the eloquent truth, eloquently spoken, is a thing instantly to be silenced. So he marshaled his peers and their valetails, and led them out to slaughter these miserable bourgeois who dared to raise a voice. But these same miserable bourgeois did not choose to be slaughtered in the streets of Rennes. It occurred to them that since the nobles decreed that blood should flow, it might as well be the blood of the nobles. They marshaled themselves too, this noble rabble against a rabble of nobles, and they marshaled themselves so well that they drove into La Dazer and his warlike following from the field with broken heads and shattered delusions. They sought shelter at the hands of the Cordeliers, and the shavelings gave them sanctuary in their convent. Those who survived, among whom was their proud leader, M. de La Dazer. You have heard of this valiant marquis, this great lord of life and death. The pit was in an uproar a moment. It quieted again as Scaramouche continued. "Oh! It was a fine spectacle to see this mighty hunter scuttle into cover like a hare, go to earth in the Cordelier convent. Rennes has not seen him since. Rennes would like to see him again, but if he is valorous, he is also discreet. And where do you think he has taken refuge? This great nobleman who wanted to see the streets of Rennes washed in the blood of its citizens. This man who had butchered old and young of the contemptible canaille to silence the voice of reason and of liberty that presumes to ring through France today. Where do you think he hides himself? Why, here in Nantes. Again there was uproar. What do you say? Impossible? Why, my friends, at this moment he is here in this theater, skulking up there in that box. He is too shy to show himself. Oh, a very modest gentleman. But there he is behind the curtains. Will you not show yourself to your friends? De la Tour d'Azur, Monsieur le Marquis, who considers eloquence so very dangerous a gift? See, they would like a word with you. They do not believe me when I tell them that you are here. Now, whatever he may have been, and whatever the views held on the subject by André-Louis, de la Tour d'Azur was certainly not a coward. To say that he was hiding in Nantes was not true. He came and went there openly and unabashed. It happened, however, that the Nantais were ignorant until this moment of his presence among them. But then he would have disdained to have informed them of it, just as he would have disdained to have concealed it from them. Challenged thus, however, and despite the ominous manner in which the bourgeois element in the audience had responded to Scaramouche's appeal to its passions, despite the attempts made by Chaberlain to restrain him, the Marquis swept aside the curtain at the side of the box and suddenly showed himself, pale but self-contained and scornful as he surveyed first the daring Scaramouche and then those others who at sight of him had given tongue to their hostility. Hoots and yells assailed him. Fists were shaken at him. Canes were brandished menacingly. Assassin, scoundrel, coward, traitor. But he braved the storm, smiling upon them his ineffable contempt. He was waiting for the noise to cease, waiting to address them in his turn. But he waited in vain, as he very soon perceived. The contempt he did not trouble to dissemble served but to goad them on. In the pit pandemonium was already raging. Blows were being freely exchanged. There were scuffling groups, and here and there swords were being drawn. But fortunately the press was too dense to permit of their being used effectively. Those who had women with them, and the timid by nature, were making haste to leave a house that looked like becoming a cockpit, where chairs were being smashed to provide weapons, and parts of chandeliers were already being used as missiles. One of these, hurled by the hand of a gentleman in one of the boxes, narrowly missed Scaramouche where he stood, looking down in a sort of grim triumph upon the havoc which his words had wrought. Knowing of what inflammable material the audience was composed, he had deliberately flung down amongst them the lighted torch of discord to produce this conflagration. He saw men falling quickly into groups representative of one side or the other of this great quarrel that already was beginning to agitate the whole of France. Their rallying cries were ringing through the theater. Down with the canaille from some, down with the privileged from others. And then above the general din one cry rang out sharply and insistently, "To the box! Death to the butcher of Rennes! Death to la Tour d'Azur, who makes war upon the people!" There was a rush for one of the doors of the pit that opened upon the staircase leading to the boxes. And now, whilst battle and confusion spread with the speed of fire, overflowing from the theater into the street itself, la Tour d'Azur's box, which had become the main object of the attack of the bourgeoisie, had also become the rallying ground for such gentlemen as were present in the theater and for those who, without being men of birth themselves, were nevertheless attached to the party of the nobles. La Tour d'Azur had quitted the front of the box to meet those who came to join him, and now in the pit one group of infuriated gentlemen, in attempting to reach the stage across the empty orchestra, so that they might deal with the audacious comedian who was responsible for this explosion, found themselves opposed and held back by another group composed of men to whose feelings André-Louis had given expression. Perceiving this, and remembering the chandelier, he turned to Leandre, who had remained beside him. "I think it is time to be going," said he. Leandre, looking ghastly under his paint, appalled by the storm which exceeded by far anything that his unimaginative brain could have conjectured, gurgled an inarticulate agreement. But it looked as if already they were too late, for in that moment they were assailed from behind. Benet had succeeded at last in breaking past Polichinelle and Rhodomont, who, in view of his murderous rage, had been endeavoring to restrain him. Half a dozen gentlemen, habitués of the green room, had come round to the stage to disembowel the knave who had created this riot, and it was they who had flung aside those two comedians who hung upon Benet. After him they came now, their swords out. But after them again came Polichinelle, Rhodomont, Harlequin, Pierrot, Pasquariel, and Bass the artist, armed with such implements as they could hastily snatch up, and intent upon saving the man with whom they sympathized in spite of all, and in whom now all their hopes were centered. Well ahead rolled Benet, moving faster than any had ever seen him move, and swinging the long cane from which Pantaloon is inseparable. "Infamous scoundrel," he roared, "you have ruined me. But, name of a name, you shall pay." André-Louis turned to face him. "You confuse cause with effect," said he, but he got no farther. Benet's cane, viciously driven, descended and broke upon his shoulder. Had he not moved swiftly aside, as the blow fell, it must have taken him across the head, and possibly stunned him. As he moved, he dropped his hand to his pocket, and swift upon the cracking of Benet's breaking cane came the crack of the pistol with which André-Louis replied. "You had your warning, you filthy pander," he cried, and on the word he shot him through the body. Benet went down screaming, whilst a fierce Polichinelle, fiercer than ever in that moment of fierce reality, spoke quickly into André-Louis' ear. "Fool, so much was not necessary. Away with you now, or you'll leave your skin here. Away with you." André-Louis thought it good advice, and took it. The gentleman who had followed Benet in that punitive rush upon the stage, partly held in check by the improvised weapons of players, partly intimidated by the second pistol that Scaramouche presented, let him go. He gained the wings, and here found himself faced by a couple of sergeants of the watch, part of police that was already invading the theater with a view to restoring order. The sight of them reminded him unpleasantly of how he must stand toward the law for this night's work, and more particularly for that bullet lodged somewhere in Benet's obese body. He flourished his pistol. "Make way, or I'll burn your brains," he threatened them, and intimidated. Themselves without firearms, they fell back and let him pass. He slipped by the door of the green room, where the ladies of the company had shut themselves in until the storm should be over, and so gained the street behind the theater. It was deserted. Down this he went at a run, intent on reaching the inn for clothes and money, since it was impossible that he should take the road in the garb of Scaramouche.